So I'm here with Miss Stella O'Malley at the GenSpec conference down here in Killiney, and it's very good to speak to you today.
Thank you very much.
So, first of all, I was intrigued by the fact that this event, which is all about kind of a critical analysis, I would say, of gender ideology and its implementation in society, the location wasn't announced until very late. What was the specific reason for that?
We chose not to announce the venue for here. We said we were going to Killarney. Killarney's small, so we didn't think that we needed to worry about, anybody getting lost. And we knew that if we released the information about the venue too early, that trans activists would perhaps try and picket the event, because they've done that on many different occasions before, and they could have closed down what is actually a very informative event.
So it seems kind of unusual that there would be a risk of picketing from trans activists, as you say.
Well, it's unusual insofar as we're in a weird world where doctors, philosophers, feminists, middle-aged mothers and psychologists would be picketed for asking questions, because actually that's our most common theme is we have questions because there's a very low evidence base. The mental health of these people do not seem to be improved by medical transition. And so it is a strange world that doctors and clinicians and academics are being picketed.
So as a psychotherapist yourself, I'm wondering what is your definition of gender, and how does that differ from the mainstream understanding of gender?
So I see sex as your biological body that you're born with, and you're born in our bodies and as our bodies, and when our bodies die, we die. There is nothing else. Like I'm an atheist. And I see gender as the socially constructed roles that are imposed upon people. So a quick rule of thumb would be sex would be male, gender would be masculine. Sex would be female, gender would be feminine. And some people are feminine women, but some people are feminine men and feminine boys. And in GenSpec, we're trying to promote a healthy approach to sex and gender. So we're trying to expand the world where you could have feminine boys, feminine men, masculine women, and without anybody saying that you have to medicalize the identity. Why not just make room for the different types of people to be?
I was intrigued by the fact that TD in Ireland, Paul Murphy, recently announced that he would be raising his child without a gender, and he said that he was doing it to give his child more options, where he said, I think it's a boy biologically, and he was saying that his son, if he wants to play with dolls or wear pink or dance, that he's not going to tell him he can't, or if it was a girl, it would be the same with sports and things like that. And what I found intriguing about it was almost implying that if a boy wants to wear pink or dance, for example, that means he is a girl on some level, as opposed to just a guy who likes dancing in the color pink. There was some unusual blurring of divides there. I'm wondering if you have any specific thoughts about that in your practice and the kinds of people you've experienced.
I think, new parents, the excitement of being a new parent, you think you're going to parent like nobody has ever parented before, and you've got these great ideas, and there's something very infectious about somebody, coming up with, we're going to do it differently. But I'd love to let Paul Murphy know that boys can wear pink, boys can wear dresses, boys can play with dolls, and you don't have to change their pronouns, you don't have to change their gender identity, you don't have to do anything. You can let them play with pink dolls and, put little ponytails in their hair. He's completely free to do that as a boy. And it's a sad society that needs to change a child's pronouns and change the structure of our way of addressing the child just because maybe a child might like one thing over another. And I do want to point out as well to Paul Murphy, this has all been tried before. In the 70s, feminists, many thousands of feminists, not just feminists, but it was very notable in the feminist movement, they brought up their children in this gender-neutral fashion. They didn't say babies, there wasn't, but they tried it. And generally, the boys ended up, not always, but very often, using the dolls as swords, using the dolls as guns, the girls ended up, using the trucks as a little kind of place to play and have picnics. Not always, these are generalizations, but our social kind of urges seem to come from lots of different places, and that's what we're trying to explore in this conference. We're not saying, because a lot of feminists will say that was all socially constructed, while other people will say not necessarily so. The science is not settled about what is driving girls to play with dolls so much and boys to play with swords. It's very interesting, and we're not saying we have any answers, we're saying we have many questions.
I believe there have been some experiments and studies done that show that similar behaviors are even exhibited in animals like rhesus monkeys and things, where you'll get male baby rhesus monkeys that prefer to play with traditionally masculine toys, and it's kind of hard to argue. You would think that monkey society is overly gendered in that way.
Yeah, there's a brilliant book by Carol Hooven called Testosterone, and anybody who's interested in this should read it, because it goes into monkeys, it goes into stags, it talks about the influx of testosterone that a baby has in utero, and then a male baby, and then he has it again at 3, and he has it again around 8 or 9, and then properly in adolescence. So testosterone does make its presence felt, and you can see it one way that's very, very notable is in rough play. Girls might be very tough, but their tendency to play in that rough play thing is quite limited, and the testosterone-driven boys are much more. Now, I'm not saying always. I was a very rough play kid, so I'm not saying there's always exceptions to the rule, but it's very interesting. The impact of testosterone and estrogen and other hormones are phenomenal, and we are ignoring that at our peril.
And even within that, of course, we've always known about tomboys and variations on what it means to be a woman or a man, and that, earlier societies before the trans phenomenon would have had no problem with that whatsoever. I'm just wondering, as somebody who's in the psychiatric field, how would you approach working with a client who was questioning their gender identity? Because I know there's a push now to conflate conversion therapy, which rightly has many negative connotations due to, I think when a lot of people think of that, they imagine children being electrocuted to change their sexuality or something very negative of this nature, whereas I correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's getting to the point where just saying to somebody, hey, maybe you don't need to radically alter yourself physically, maybe you are just the gender that you were born with, that could even come under the umbrella of conversion therapy. I'm wondering if you could speak just a little bit about that, or correct me if I've made any mistakes there, because you're obviously more familiar with this than I am.
Yeah, it's a very complex field, very easy to make mistakes in it. A key part of conversion therapy is up until around about 2015 or so, it was always about therapists trying to change the sexual orientation of a client. And then they put in, for no valid reason that I know, they put in gender identity and gender expression, which is completely off the wall, and they added that to their understanding and definition of conversion therapy, which made it a much more complicated sentence, because, that's number one. Number two, any ethical therapist would never have a specific outcome in mind for a client. Our job is to kind of support the client as they undergo a process of self-awareness. And so ethical therapy, it's already covered. It's already covered with my standards of care. It's already covered with the guidelines of my own therapeutic practice. We don't need to bring in another law when actually it's covered within the ethics of therapy, which I'm very glad it is. But I do want to say that, Roderick O'Gorman, he did a scoping survey in 2021 looking for evidence of conversion therapy in Ireland in the last 20 years, and he couldn't find any. And he found a little bit of conversion practices. It was kind of exorcism and demonic, kind of very heavy religious practices. So he had that and nothing else. It was tiny and it was nothing to do with therapy. And then, very much like the Nice Treaty, when we were asked, the question, and then we got it wrong, so they asked us again. Well, then Roderick O'Gorman did a second survey, which he's just released, and GenSpect with our conference have launched a review of the second piece of research, and he just released it a couple of months ago. And in that research, he, funnily enough, very like the Nice Treaty, he got the answer right this time, because he did find evidence of conversion therapy. What's very key about this is, this time he used anonymous online surveys. And therefore, that's how we got evidence, because it was unverifiable, unfalsifiable. We can't prove whether it, but I do note that in this survey, which was, released by Trinity College, which should have kind of weight and depth and some level of integrity, they have a 12-year-old apparently received electric convulsive therapy for conversion therapy. Now, I know Ireland, and I'm sure everybody else does. No 12-year-old has received ECT in decades, if ever, in Ireland, let alone a 12-year-old with a gender issue. This is not, it made a farce of the document. So it's a beautiful, very well it's plush, this document. And then they have this 12-year-old with ECT, and it's like, yeah, that's what you get when you get anonymous online surveys. That's just rubbish.
So you would say then that a lot of this trying to incorporate gender identity into the conversion therapy discussion is contrived then. It's just to sort of hamstring potentially people tackling this issue or addressing it in the way it needs to be addressed. Would that be an accurate assessment? I
think we don't need to worry about conversion therapy. It's not happening. We've checked it. It's not happening. I'm delighted it's not happening. It's not happening. No ethical therapist has a kind of a hoped for outcome. We don't work like that. We have candles, and we're getting into people's feelings, and we're about compassion and empathy. We don't have plans, and if we are, we shouldn't be in therapy. And thankfully, our guidance is already covered with our accreditation bodies. It's covered. So the reason that conversion therapy is hot, and it's going out across the world, very interesting, like the conversion therapy ban bill in Ireland is, almost identical in New Zealand. These are very similar bills that are being swept across the world, and it's very much because of politics. This is to do with trans activism. This isn't to do with because there's been a rise in conversion therapy. There hasn't been. There hasn't been any.
How do you feel about the increasing number of children and adolescents who are identifying as transgender and seeking medical interventions such as hormone therapy and gender reassignment surgery and things like that? We've seen this not only in Ireland but in most Western countries now. It seems to be a sweeping trend. What do you think of that specifically?
I think it's very worrisome to see children who are gender non-conforming to be medicalised, because when you medicalise a child with puberty blockers, generally around puberty, you're suppressing their sexual awakening. And so when everybody else, but from about 10 to 20, they start fancying other people, they fall in love, they have a sexual urge. It's really complicated. We don't know how to handle it in society, but it's there. And these children who are blocked, they don't have any sexual awakening. And what's really important about that point is about 70-80% of gender non-conforming kids end up as lesbians or gay. So the feminine little boy who could be gender dysphoric because he's feminine and he might be internalized kind of homophobia, he mightn't want to be gay, but he's a feminine boy. If his puberty is blocked, he will never figure out that he is a gay man because he won't have a sexual awakening. The very same of the little butch lesbian. She doesn't know she's a little butch lesbian. She's a little girl, but she's very masculine. And when she goes through puberty, she will start fancying girls. And then the kind of gender non-conforming, we don't know why that is linked, but it's massively, 70-80% are of non-conforming children end up being gay or lesbian or bisexual. And so that little butch lesbian, if her puberty is blocked, she won't fall in love, she won't fancy other girls, and therefore her sexual awakening has been stunted, it's been literally blocked. And I think that's a tragedy for those children. And we have a detransitioners panel in Genspect, in the conference tonight, for that express reason, to talk about the detransitioners who have gone through that. And we had a panel discussion saying, what if they're gay and not trans? And in it, two detransitioners spoke saying, I was gay and I didn't know I was gay. I thought I was trans. And I ended up transitioning. I had a mastectomy. My voice has changed. I'm testosterone voice and very deep. And now I realise I was a lesbian. I didn't need to do any of that.
What changes would you like to see in your field as far as how psychiatric care could change to deal with the issue of people's gender identity in a better and healthier way? What changes would you like to see happen in that regard?
In GenSpec, what we're looking for is public awareness campaign, just people understanding what is gender identity, what is sexual orientation and the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity, and what are the issues that are arising. Let's say, for example, with medical transition, why would I be wary of it? And that's the word I am, just cautious. It's because it carries a very heavy medical burden on the body. There's an awful lot of increased complications with all sorts of things from osteoporosis, infertility, sexual functioning. So if there was public awareness about the issues, I think society and gender non-conforming people will be much better off.